She was a night shift nurse coming off a 12-hour shift. They thought she was easy. They were wrong. The alley behind Riverside Medical Center was dark, quiet, and completely empty when the first man grabbed Emily Carter from behind. His arm locked across her throat and lifted her clean off the pavement. She couldn't scream. She couldn't breathe. 3 men closed in around her, certain they had cornered something small and helpless. "Stay quiet," one of them said, "and this ends easy." He had no idea what was about to come charging out of the dark. If this story has you hooked already, hit subscribe and follow along until the very end. I promise you will not see this coming. Drop a like and leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The shift had run long, the way they always did on Tuesdays. Emily Carter clocked out at 12:47 a.m. 3 minutes later than she'd planned, which meant she missed the window where 2 other nurses from the overnight team usually walked out together. The parking structure elevator was down again. Maintenance had taped an out-of-order sign across it sometime around 10, so she took the side stairwell exit that dumped out into the narrow service alley running along the north face of Riverside Medical Center. It wasn't the route she preferred. The overhead lights had been flickering for a week. She'd filed a facilities complaint about it twice. Nobody had fixed anything. She had her bag over one shoulder, her keys already in her left hand, and her mind was somewhere between the patient in Bay 6, who'd been running a fever all night, and whether she'd left her phone charger plugged in at the nurse's station again. 31 years old, 4 years on the overnight floor, and she still couldn't break the habit of replaying shifts in her head on the walk out. She was 10 steps into the alley when she heard the footsteps. Not one set. 3. She didn't panic. That was the thing people who'd never met Emily would never understand until they did. She didn't panic. She'd been in places where panic got people killed, and some part of her nervous system had been rewired somewhere between her second deployment and her third, so that when fear should have spiked, it flattened instead into something cold and very, very focused. She slowed her pace by half a step, listening, calculating distance. 2 of them behind her, closing fast, one ahead, already in position beside the dumpster on the left. She caught a shadow shift against the chain link at the far end and adjusted her estimate. 3 total. Maybe a 4th. Set formation. This wasn't opportunistic. These weren't men who'd spotted a woman walking alone and made a decision in the moment. They'd been waiting. She was 1 step short of the halfway point of the alley when the one behind her moved. He was big. She registered that immediately. Not through sight, but through the sheer physics of his arm coming across her throat from behind. His body mass swinging into the motion, momentum carrying both of them off the ground for a half second before her feet left the pavement entirely. Chokehold. Applied by someone who knew what they were doing, or at least knew enough to lock the elbow and squeeze before she could tuck her chin. Her keys hit the asphalt. Her bag dropped. The world tilted. "Stay quiet," one of the men in front of her said. He stepped into the edge of the light. Younger than she'd expected, maybe mid-20s, wearing a dark jacket, expression flat and businesslike. "And this ends easy." She couldn't speak. The pressure on her carotid was already building, and the edges of her vision were beginning to crystallize in that particular way that meant blood flow was restricted. She had seconds before it stopped mattering whether she had training or not. Her right hand found the small titanium whistle clipped to the inside of her jacket collar. It wasn't decorative. It wasn't for jogging. The frequency had been calibrated specifically, a pitch range she'd worked out with a trainer 2 years ago, one that carried through ambient urban noise and cut directly through the range a trained shepherd's auditory system was tuned to. She pressed the pin mechanism and blew with everything left in her lungs. She didn't hear anything. She wasn't supposed to. But across the parking structure, in the back of her car where Ghost had been resting with the rear window cracked 2 inches, the sound registered like a gunshot. What happened next took less than 4 seconds. The back window exploded outward, not shattered, just the impact of 85 pounds of muscle and trained aggression clearing it in a single motion. Ghost hit the alley at a full sprint before the glass finished bouncing. He didn't bark. He didn't slow. He had a target, and he covered the distance between the parking structure and Emily's position in the time it took the man holding her to register that something was wrong. The impact broke the chokehold before the man could brace. Ghost didn't bite to hold. He hit, redirected, and held the arm exactly the way he'd been trained, because a dog that panics and bites everything in reach is a liability, and Emily had never kept liabilities. The man went down hard against the alley wall. The second one lunged and Ghost pivoted without instruction, 3 years of conditioning making the decision before any human in the scene could process it. Emily hit the ground on one knee, coughing, throat burning. The third man hesitated. That hesitation lasted about a second and a half. It was enough. She came up from the ground with her body between him and the dog, and her voice sharp enough to cut. "Don't!" He ran. The one Ghost had put against the wall stumbled after him. The second one managed to get his feet under him and follow. By the time the first police unit rolled into the alley, 4.5 minutes after an automated alert triggered from the hospital's rear camera system, Emily was crouched beside Ghost with her hand on his neck, checking him for injury, her bag recovered and her keys back in her hand. The responding officer came in with his flashlight and his hand on his holster and found a woman in scrubs examining a German shepherd in the middle of what looked like a fight scene. "Ma'am, are you—" "I'm fine," Emily said. Her voice was rougher than usual. She'd have bruising on her throat by morning. "3 men? One of them's bleeding from his right forearm. Dog contact. They went east on Merchant Street. I have partial plate on a gray sedan that was idling at the far end of the alley. I can give you that now or after you've called it in. Your call." The officer stared at her for a moment. "Army," she added, like that explained everything. It mostly did. He shot. The next 4 hours were the standard aftermath of something that shouldn't have happened in a hospital alley at 1 in the morning. A second unit, a supervisor, a detective named Rourke, who had the particular energy of someone who'd been pulled off something else and wasn't fully present yet, though he sharpened up quickly once Emily started talking. Paramedics looked at her throat, confirmed the bruising, recommended imaging she declined. Someone from hospital administration showed up in street clothes looking faintly panicked, and Emily spent about 90 seconds explaining to him that she was not going to comment on inadequate facility lighting to any press that might show up, but that she fully expected the maintenance work order to be completed before tomorrow's shift, and he nodded like a man who understood consequences. Ghost sat at her left knee through the entire interview, motionless, watching Rourke with calm, professional interest. "He's got credentials?" Rourke asked, nodding at the dog. "Full protection certification. I kept his documents current after I separated. He's licensed for the city." Rourke wrote something down. He was a careful note-taker, which Emily appreciated. Sloppy documentation was how cases fell apart. She'd watched it happen to friends. "You said the plate was partial. Last 4 digits. I didn't have the angle for the full sequence, but gray sedan, older model, significant rust damage on the rear quarter panel, passenger side. Driver didn't get out. Driver stayed in the car. For the whole thing, which tells you something." Rourke looked up from his notepad. "It tells me there was a fourth," she said, "and that fourth one was there to supervise, not participate. The other 3 were hired." He studied her for a moment. "That's a significant conclusion from a partial plate and a driver who didn't move." "It's a working hypothesis," Emily said. "You're the detective. But 3 men who know how to set a coordinated ambush in a location they had to have scouted don't do that because they spotted someone in a parking lot. They were told where I'd be, approximately when, and which exit I'd take. Someone gave them that." "You have enemies?" She almost said no. It was the automatic answer, the social reflex. Then she stopped and thought about the past 6 months, and what she'd done with them, and what she'd done before that, and she looked at Rourke and decided he seemed like someone who could actually use the truth. "There's a man named Victor Hale," she said. "He runs a commercial breeding operation outside the city. Larkvale Kennels, out on Route 9. About 7 months ago, I reported him to County Animal Services for conditions for what I observed on a property adjacent to his facility. I was there doing volunteer work with a rescue group. What I saw wasn't ambiguous." "You reported him?" "Twice. The first report got reassigned. The second one resulted in an inspection that found nothing, which isn't possible given what I documented, which means someone told him the inspection was coming." She paused. "I filed a second set of documentation with a state oversight board 4 months ago. Hale has local connections, political ones, the kind that make local complaints disappear." Rourke's pen had stopped moving. He was looking at her with the careful attention of a man who was recalibrating something. You think this Hale arranged an assault on a hospital nurse over an animal welfare complaint. I think, Emily said, that animal welfare was the surface. What's underneath it is financial. The breeding operation is a front, or part of one. I don't have full documentation on what it's a front for, but I have enough to make someone nervous. She reached into her bag and produced a manila envelope, slightly bent from the fall, but intact. This is a copy. I keep originals off-site. Rourke took the envelope, held it. You brought this to an assault interview. I brought it because if tonight was what I think it was, there won't be a second attempt if whoever arranged this knows I've already handed documentation to law enforcement. She met his eyes. It's also just good practice. She got home at 4:15 a.m. Ghost ate, drank water, and went to sleep on the floor beside the bed within 10 minutes. Emily sat at her kitchen table for a while longer, ice pack against her throat, looking at nothing in particular. Her phone rang at 6:03. Unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. Listened to the message standing at her kitchen counter. How's your dog doing? 3 words, measured, pleasant, designed to sound casual. Victor Hale's voice. She'd heard it before, twice, in public, at county zoning meetings. The tone was the same one he used when he was absolutely certain he was the most powerful person in any room he walked into. She played the message twice. Then she set the phone down and wrote the exact time, the number, and the transcript in the notebook she kept in the kitchen drawer. She'd been keeping that notebook for 4 months. It had 43 pages in it. She slept 3 hours. Woke up with her throat aching and her mind running. The thing about Victor Hale that most people didn't understand, because most people's understanding of him came from the quarterly profiles in the Blackstone City Business Review, the photos at charity dinners, the 2 terms he'd spent on the County Economic Development Board, was that he was competent, not in the ways he presented. His actual professional competence was limited. What he was genuinely good at was identifying people who could be used and people who needed to be removed, and acting quickly enough that neither group had time to organize a response. Emily had known men like him in the Army, not the rank-and-file bullies, the other kind, the ones who wore their authority softly, who built systems of obligation and fear that operated without their visible fingerprints, who were genuinely surprised when someone stood outside those systems and looked at them without flinching. She'd filed her first report on Larkvale Kennels because she'd seen what she'd seen, and what she'd seen was specific and documentable and wrong. She'd continued filing because she'd noticed the pattern of interference. She'd started keeping the notebook because after the second inspection that found nothing, she'd called a contact in the state veterinary licensing office and been told, very carefully and with no specifics, that there were questions about Larkvale's operation that predated her complaints by at least 2 years. Someone had been watching Hale for a while, someone with more institutional weight than a county animal services inspector. She hadn't made the connection to anything larger until the 4th month, when she'd run into a man named Darnell Whitfield at a city council public comment session. Whitfield was an accountant, semi-retired, who'd done bookkeeping work for 3 different vendors that serviced Larkvale Kennels. He'd shown up at the public comment session to speak about commercial zoning irregularities. He'd been given 90 seconds and talked very fast. After, in the parking lot, Emily had asked him what he'd actually been trying to say before the timer cut him off. "The money," he'd told her, glancing around with the controlled anxiety of someone who'd already decided he was in over his head. "Doesn't add up. Hasn't added up for years. A kennel that size, with that overhead, doesn't operate at that cash flow unless there's income that isn't on any form I ever filed." She'd told him to call the State Oversight Board. He'd said he'd think about it. He hadn't called. She'd called for him, anonymously, and included his name as a potential corroborating witness in her documentation. Whether that was a kindness or not, she still wasn't sure. Her second shift of the week was Thursday. She reported on time, worked 12 hours, and said nothing to anyone on staff about what had happened Tuesday night, except that she'd had a situation in the parking area, which was why she was wearing a turtleneck in June. Sandra Mejia, who'd been the charge nurse on the floor for 9 years and missed exactly nothing, fell into step beside her at the medication cart at R7 and said, without looking up from the chart in her hands, "You're favoring your left side. And before you tell me you pulled something, I've seen pulled muscles, and whatever is under that collar isn't one." "I'm fine, Sandra." I know you're fine. You're always fine. That's not what I asked. Sandra finally looked up. 44, sharp eyes, the particular kind of tired that comes from caring about people for too long. You in trouble? Working on it. Sandra held the eye contact for another moment, then handed Emily the chart. 3 in Bay 9 needs a reassessment on his fluid output. He keeps arguing with the numbers. I'll talk to him. I know you will. She got home at 1:30, found a car she didn't recognize parked across the street from her building. Nothing definitive, wrong to ignore. She photographed the plate, went inside through the service entrance, and added the photo to the folder on her phone she'd labeled MySeek. Friday, she slept late, went over her documentation again, and made a call she'd been sitting on for 3 weeks. Marcus Dre answered on the second ring. Dre had been her team sergeant in the Army. He'd left service a year before she did, gone into private investigations for a while, and then, through a sequence of events she'd never fully gotten out of him, ended up working with a federal task force operating out of the regional field office. She knew him well enough to know when to call him and when not to. She'd waited until now because she hadn't had enough. Emily, he said, I was wondering when you'd get here. You've been expecting my call? Not specifically yours, but something coming from Blackstone City around Larkvale. Yeah, we've been watching that area. She sat down. How long? Longer than you. A beat. How bad is the throat? She paused. News travels. One of the responding officers Thursday night recognized your name from a cross-reference flag we have on Hale. He ran the report through the right channel. I saw it yesterday morning. Another beat. You should have called me sooner. I didn't have enough. You had enough by month 3. I know your documentation standards, Em. You were waiting because you didn't trust the local circuit. She didn't answer that because he was right and they both knew it. Tell me where you are, Dre said. Sitting at my kitchen table with 43 pages of notes, a phone message from a man who ordered a 3-man ambush on a hospital nurse, and a dog who needs a new window for my car. She could hear him exhaling. Okay, I need 24 hours to make some calls. Don't send anything digitally until I say go. And Emily, don't answer numbers you don't know. Little late for that one. I know. Next time. She hung up. Ghost had moved from the floor to the couch. Against the rules, technically, but she let it go on days like this. She sat beside him and looked at the manila folders spread across the table. 43 pages. Photographs. Financial records Whitfield had been persuaded to provide. Inspection reports with inconsistencies she'd highlighted in 3 different colors. One voicemail transcript, it wasn't nothing. It was the opposite of nothing. It just needed to land somewhere that had the weight to do something with it. She was reaching to gather the folders when her phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Not Hale's voice this time. Just 4 words. Drop it or else. She photographed the screen, added it to the folder, made a note in the kitchen drawer notebook. Time, content, number. Then she went to bed. She had a shift in 11 hours. Saturday arrived gray and humid, the kind of June morning that couldn't decide whether it wanted to rain. Emily got to Riverside Medical Center 40 minutes early, which was habit, and used the time to review the prior shift's handoff notes in the break room with a coffee she didn't really taste. She was 3 pages into the stack when the unit coordinator, a young man named Perry who was genuinely good at his job and therefore chronically exhausted, came through the break room door looking like someone had told him something he was hoping to unhear. Hey, Carter, you got a minute? Sure. HR left a note. He set a paper on the table in front of her. They want to see you Monday morning. Administration. She picked up the paper. Standard HR header, Riverside Medical Center. The date, her name, and below it a notice of a formal review regarding an unspecified conduct concern. No detail. No indication of who had filed the concern. She read it twice. Her face didn't change. You know what it's about? Perry asked. I have some ideas. She folded the paper and put it in her bag. Thanks for the heads up. He looked like he wanted to say something else. He left instead, which was the right call. She worked the shift. Did her job. A pediatric respiratory case in Bay 4 that required the kind of sustained attention that left no room for anything else for about 90 minutes. and she was grateful for it. The specific clarity that comes from work that matters, that demands your actual presence. An elderly woman in Bay 11 who was frightened and kept asking for someone to hold her hand while the attending explained her imaging results, and Emily stayed longer than strictly required, because that was the job too, the part that didn't show up in any review metric. At hour 10, Sandra appeared again. "You saw the HR notice. Perry told you. Perry tells me everything. It's his primary function." Sandra leaned against the wall outside Bay 11 with her arms crossed. "This have anything to do with what happened Tuesday?" "I think it's related to something I reported 7 months ago. Someone's going after your license." "Going after my employment first. License would be a second move." Emily said it flat, the way you say a thing when you've already processed it and moved through it. "It's a pressure play. If I'm dealing with HR, I'm not dealing with anything else." "Can they make something stick?" "Only if I've done something wrong. I haven't." She glanced at Sandra. "My documentation is current. My patient records are clean. Whatever complaint they filed, it's not going to find anything real. But it buys them time." "That's the point." Sandra was quiet for a moment. "You need a union rep Monday." "I know. I'll make the call tonight. Barrera's the best. She's handled 3 of these in the past 2 years, and the hospital's 0 for 3 with her in the room." Emily looked at her. "You don't have to." "Emily." Sandra's voice had the particular firmness that came from almost a decade of running a hospital floor, of making decisions and standing behind them. "You've worked here 4 years. I've never had to correct your work. I've had to remind you to eat and sometimes to go home, but I've never once had to tell you something was wrong. So yeah, I'm making the call." She pushed off the wall. "Bay 6 needs a reassessment. Go." Emily went. She left the hospital at 2 a.m. This time she exited through the main lobby, in a group of 3 people, and her car was parked in the lit main structure near the elevator that worked. Ghost was behind her seat, awake and watchful, and she drove home on a route she hadn't used before. The gray sedan was on her street again. Different spot, but she recognized the rust on the rear quarter panel. She drove past without slowing, went around the block, took 3 photographs from different angles. Then she called Dre. "The sedan is back," she said when he answered. A pause. "Where are you?" "Safe, moving." She kept driving. No destination, just coverage. "He filed something with HR, conduct review." "Of course he did." Dre's voice had shifted into operational mode, the tone she remembered from planning sessions, from nights where there were too many variables and not enough time. "Listen to me. I've got confirmation from my contacts that there's a federal financial crimes wire that's been running for 14 months. Hale is on it. Your documentation connects to materials they already have, and your assault is exactly the kind of overt act that lets them expand jurisdiction." He paused. "I need everything you have. Physically, not digitally. Can you get to a secure location tomorrow?" "Yes." "Good. Don't go back to your apartment tonight." She thought about the sedan, about the 4 words in the text, about the perfectly pleasant voice asking how her dog was doing. "I wasn't planning to," she said. She drove for another hour. Ghost slept in the back. The rain finally started, light and steady, blurring the city lights into long streaks across her windshield. She didn't know exactly what was coming. She knew Hale still thought he could manage this the way he'd managed everything else, with money, with pressure, with the quiet weight of people in the right positions doing what he needed them to do. She knew he'd miscalculated, because he'd never encountered something that simply refused to move, refused to be bought or frightened or exhausted into silence. What she didn't know was that 14 months of federal wire work had just found the thread it had been looking for. What she didn't know was that by Monday morning, 3 separate agencies were going to be in a room together looking at a timeline that started with a kennel complaint filed by a night shift nurse. She pulled into the parking lot of an extended stay motel off Route 12, booked a room with cash she kept in her center console for exactly this kind of contingency, and carried Ghost's water bowl inside under one arm. She set her documentation folders on the bed, opened her notebook to a fresh page, wrote the date, the time, and the word sedan with the plate numbers beneath it. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She looked at it for a long moment, Then it buzzed again. This time the screen showed a name she recognized. Not Dre, not Sandra, not anyone from the hospital. It was a name from a business card she'd been given 3 months ago by a woman in a gray blazer at the county zoning meeting. A woman who'd introduced herself quietly and said almost nothing, except at the end, when she'd pressed the card into Emily's hand and said, "If the local channels don't hold, use this." The title on that card read, Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Emily stared at the name on her screen. Then she answered. "Carter," said Special Agent Nora Voss. Her voice was level and unhurried, the kind of calm that isn't natural but gets trained into you. "I've been waiting for you to use this number." Emily sat on the edge of the motel bed. Ghost had positioned himself at the door, facing it, which was what he did when he decided a space needed monitoring. "How long have you been watching Hale?" Emily asked. "Long enough to know that what happened Tuesday night wasn't random and wasn't local." A pause, brief and deliberate. "Where are you right now?" "Somewhere dry." "Good. Stay there. I'll come to you in the morning." Another pause. "Don't call Dre again tonight." Emily's hand tightened slightly on the phone. "You know Marcus. I know the task force he's attached to, and I know their timeline doesn't match mine, and right now that matters." Voss's voice didn't shift in tone, but something in the sentence had weight to it. "You have physical documentation, don't transmit it, don't photograph it, and send it anywhere. Just hold it until morning. And if someone comes for it tonight, Ghost is with you?" "Yes." "Then you're fine." A beat. "Get some sleep, Carter. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." The call ended. Emily sat with the phone in her hand for a moment, looking at the folders spread across the motel bed. 43 pages, plus the voicemail, plus the text, plus the sedan's plates. She got maybe 4 hours. Ghost woke her once at 3 a.m. by lifting his head sharply, and she was sitting up before she was fully conscious, but whatever he'd heard didn't materialize into anything, and after 2 minutes he put his head back down. She lay staring at the water-stained ceiling of the motel room until 5 a.m. and then gave up and made terrible coffee from the machine on the bathroom counter. Voss arrived at 7:12. She drove a plain gray government sedan, not the rusted one, and she came alone, which was either a good sign or a calculated one. She was 40, maybe 42, with the kind of face that had probably always looked like it meant business, and she wore the gray blazer Emily remembered from the zoning meeting. She looked at the folders on the bed, then at Emily's throat, then at Ghost, who had stood up when she entered and was watching her with professional neutrality. "He cleared me," Voss said. It wasn't a question. "He's deciding," Emily said. "Sit down." Voss sat in the room's single chair. Emily stayed on the bed. Ghost sat between them. "Talk to me about the task force timeline," Emily said. "You said it doesn't match yours." "Dre's group is financial crimes. They've been building a money laundering case for 14 months, and they're not ready to move. They need another 60 to 90 days to fully document the financial structure." Voss pulled out a small notepad, actual paper, not a tablet, and opened it on her knee. "My interest is different. I'm working a federal witness intimidation angle that predates the financial wire. There are 2 other individuals in Blackstone City who reported issues connected to Hale's operation over the past 3 years. One recanted, one relocated without explanation." Emily looked at her. "What happened to them?" "The woman who recanted got a noise complaint filed against her business 4 days after her original statement. Then a zoning issue. Then her commercial lease wasn't renewed." Voss said it without editorializing, just the sequence of events. "The one who relocated, he was a city inspector named Greer. He documented irregularities at Larkvale during a routine site visit 18 months ago and submitted a report to county. 3 weeks later, he requested a transfer to the state's Western District and left within the month. I've spoken to him once by phone. He's cooperative but scared." "Hale built a system for this," Emily said. "Not just for me, a system." "Yes. And you're the first one who didn't move." Voss looked at her directly. "Which is why Tuesday happened. He escalated because the standard pressure wasn't working." Emily thought about the HR notice. "He's still trying the standard pressure." "The conduct review," Voss nodded. "We know about it. He made calls to 2 members of the hospital board, We have those calls on the financial wire because the board members have financial relationships with one of his shell companies, so their communications were already captured. She paused. That's actually useful to us. It documents coordination and adds a retaliation element to the federal case. He's adding charges to himself. Consistently. For a half-second, something in Voss's expression shifted. Not quite amusement, but an acknowledgement of the particular irony of watching a careful man become careless. I need your documentation, and I need a formal statement on Tuesday's assault, on the voicemail, and on the text, filed through my office rather than the local detective's report. Detective Rourke already has my initial statement. Rourke is good. He's also local, which means he goes through channels that Hale has relationships with. Anything in the local chain is at risk of telegraphing. Voss held out her hand. What you give me goes directly into a federal file. Different jurisdiction, different exposure. Emily picked up the manila envelope and handed it over. Voss opened it and went through it methodically. She didn't rush, which Emily respected. She flagged 3 pages with small adhesive tabs she produced from her jacket pocket and made notes in the notepad. Ghost watched the whole process and eventually decided it was non-threatening enough to lie down. Whitfield's records, Voss said, on the 4th page. You got him to provide these voluntarily? Eventually. Is he willing to talk to us? He's willing to be frightened by the idea of talking to you. Whether that translates to actual cooperation depends on whether someone sits across from him and makes it feel safer to talk than not to. Emily paused. He's not brave. He's not going to do the right thing because it's the right thing. But he doesn't want to go down with a ship he didn't know he was on. That's workable. Voss made a note. I'll reach out to him through a neutral channel, something that doesn't flag as federal until he's already in a conversation. You're good at that. It's most of the job. Voss closed the envelope and set it on the chair arm. Monday's HR meeting. You need to attend it. Emily had expected the opposite instruction. You want me to go? I want you to go, have your union rep present, say nothing incriminating, decline to answer anything speculative, and let them put whatever they're going to put in the file. Voss met her eyes. Every move Hale makes against you right now is evidence. The more formal it gets, the more useful it is. If you skip the meeting, you give them grounds to escalate without creating a paper trail on their end. I become the problem employee instead of the target. Exactly. She stood. I'm going to need you to move locations. Not far. There's an extended stay on the east side, the Caldwell Inn. Federal rate account. We use it for witness situations. Check in under your name, pay normally. We'll have someone in the adjacent room by tonight. You're putting eyes on me. I'm being careful. Voss picked up the envelope. You've been careful for 7 months with no institutional support. Let me provide some. Emily thought about the last 7 months. The filed complaints that went nowhere. The notebook in the kitchen drawer. The night she'd done the math on whether she was building a case or just documenting her own harassment. Yeah, she said. Okay. Ma'am. The Caldwell Inn was a step above the motel. Not by much, but the coffee machine worked and the parking lot was well lit. Emily checked in, let Ghost investigate the new space with the systematic attention he brought to every unfamiliar room, and then sat at the small desk by the window and did the thing she'd been putting off for 3 days. She called her brother. Joel Carter was 36, lived in Portland with his wife and 2 kids, and had the particular combination of protectiveness and helplessness that came from being a good person who was also 4 hours away and not equipped for any of this. He answered on the 3rd ring, and she could hear his kids in the background. Em. Hey. A pause. You okay? You sound... I'm fine. I'm staying somewhere other than my apartment for a few days. Don't call the apartment number. Silence. The kids' voices in the background dropped away, which meant he'd moved to another room. What happened? It's handled. I need you to know I'm okay, and I need you not to ask me for details right now because I can't give them. Emily, well, Joel. She kept her voice even. I have people helping me. I'm not alone. Ghost is fine. I'm going to work Monday, and this is going to get resolved, but I need you to not do anything. No calls to anyone here, no reaching out to find out what's happening. It'll make things more complicated. A long silence. She could hear him breathing, calculating, doing what Joel did, which was try to find the version of events where he could do something useful. Is this about that Hale thing? The kennel? Don't say that name on a phone call. Another silence, shorter. He understood phones. He wasn't naive. Okay, you'll call me. When I can, yes. Every day. Joel? Every day, Emily. That's not negotiable. One call. Even 30 seconds. She exhaled. Fine. Every day. After she hung up, she sat with the phone in her hand and felt, for the first time in 4 days, something close to tired. Not the functional tired of missed sleep. The other kind. The kind that came from carrying something alone for too long, from the specific weight of being careful and competent and contained when what you actually wanted, just for 5 minutes, was to put it all down and not be the person holding it together. Ghost patted over and put his head in her lap. She put her hand on the back of his neck. Good boy, she said. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. She gave herself exactly 7 minutes. Then she opened her notebook and started on page 44. Sunday passed in a controlled kind of suspended animation. Voss checked in once by text. A single word, clear, which Emily understood to mean no new developments and no new threats. She used the time to reconstruct everything she had into a clean sequential summary, the kind of document a federal case file would need: dates, actions, observed connections, persons of interest, her own movements at each stage. She wrote it by hand because typing felt exposed in a way she couldn't fully rationalize but didn't ignore. She also pulled up everything publicly available on Victor Hale that she hadn't looked at in the past 2 weeks. His name appeared in business filings for 9 separate entities. Larkvale Kennels was the most visible, but 3 of the others were property holding companies with addresses in counties she'd never connected to him before. One of them, a shell registered to a secondary LLC, showed a board member whose name she recognized from the County Economic Development Board. A man named Pruitt, who'd twice publicly supported Hale at zoning hearings, and who'd been photographed with the county sheriff at last year's Chamber of Commerce banquet. She added Pruitt's name to her summary. Not as a conclusion, she didn't have the financial thread Dre's people had, but as a connection point that the federal file should see. At 4 p.m., a knock at the door. Not Voss. A younger agent, male, late 20s, who introduced himself as Kellner and said almost nothing else except that he was in the room next door and to knock twice on the shared wall if she needed him. What's the protocol if someone tries to access this room? Emily asked. Don't let it get that far. Lock is reinforced. If ghost alerts, call my cell. It's in that folder, before you do anything else. He handed her a thin manila folder with 2 printed pages inside. Voss also wants you to read this before tomorrow. She closed the door and read. The first page was a summary of the Financial Wire's current status, sanitized for her clearance level, which meant most of the specific figures were redacted, but the shape of the thing was visible. Hale's operation had moved substantial funds through 4 different entities over a period of roughly 2 years. The pattern was consistent with money laundering through what appeared to be a combination of real estate transactions and commercial livestock sales. The kennel providing cover for cash flows that didn't correspond to any documented breeding or sales volume. The second page was shorter. It was a list of 3 names under the header Potential Witnesses. Approach status. The first was Whitfield, marked Pending Contact. The second was Greer, the relocated city inspector, marked Cooperative Protected Location. The third name she didn't recognize, a woman named Paloma Reyes, listed as a former employee of Larkvale Kennels, marked Status Unknown, last contact 6 weeks ago. Emily stared at that third entry for a long time. Status unknown in a federal document was a particular kind of phrase. It didn't mean the person had moved away or changed their number. It meant the agency had lost track of them and wasn't sure why. She photographed the page, then stopped herself, then put the phone down. No digital transmission. She wrote Paloma Reyes' name in her notebook instead, and next to it a question mark, and next to that, the date. Monday arrived with the kind of flat overcast that made it impossible to tell what time the sun had risen. Emily was dressed and ready by 7 a.m., files in order, documentation secure with Voss's office. Ghost was staying at the Caldwell with Kellner monitoring, which was a compromise she'd negotiated the night before and didn't fully like but understood the reasoning for. She drove to Riverside Medical Center, parked in the main structure, second level near the stairwell, sat for a moment in the car. The HR meeting was at 9. Sandra's union contact, Barrera, had called her Saturday night. Direct, efficient, asked exactly the right questions and no extras. She'd arrived this morning at 8:45, a small woman in her 50s with reading glasses and a legal pad, and the specific energy of someone who had heard every version of this kind of meeting before and found none of them impressive. They sat in the waiting area outside HR together. Barrera didn't make small talk. Emily appreciated that. At 9:03, the HR director, a man named Sloan, came out and gestured them in. He was mid-40s, carefully neutral in the way HR people learn to be when they know the meeting is being documented. With him was a woman Emily didn't recognize, introduced as legal counsel for the hospital. Ms. Carter, Sloan began, settling into his chair with the careful posture of a man who'd been coached on how to sit in this kind of meeting. Thank you for coming in. We want to be clear that this is a preliminary review, not a disciplinary hearing. And first, what's the specific complaint? Barrera said. Not rudely, just efficiently. Sloan looked at his paper. There's been a concern raised regarding Ms. Carter's conduct outside of working hours that may constitute a reputational risk to the institution. Specifically, allegations that she has engaged in communications with outside parties that misrepresented hospital operations. Emily didn't move. She watched Sloan's face. Who filed the complaint? Barrera asked. That information is confidential at this stage. Is the complaint in writing? A summary has been provided to us by... Sloan stopped, glanced at the attorney. By a concerned party. So verbal, unsworn. Barrera made a note. And this alleged misrepresentation of hospital operations, can you give us the specific statement Ms. Carter is supposed to have made? The attorney leaned in to say something quietly to Sloan. He cleared his throat. We've been informed that Ms. Carter made statements to outside investigators that characterized Riverside Medical Center's administration as complicit in certain activities that... I haven't said anything about hospital administration, Emily said. Her voice was completely level. My complaints have been about a privately owned commercial operation that has no affiliation with Riverside Medical Center. If someone told you otherwise, they misrepresented what I said. Silence. Sloan looked at his paper again, as if the paper might offer something useful. It didn't. Is there documentation of these alleged statements? Barrera asked. Sloan looked at the attorney again. We're still gathering materials, the attorney said. So you've opened a formal review process based on a verbal complaint from an unidentified party with no written documentation. Barrera set her pen down with the precise deliberateness of someone who'd just made a point she wanted logged. What is the proposed outcome of today's meeting? We wanted to give Ms. Carter an opportunity to... She has nothing to respond to. Barrera closed her legal pad. If you obtain written documentation of a specific verifiable complaint, we're happy to schedule a follow-up. Until then, Ms. Carter is available to return to her duties. She looked at Emily. Unless you have anything to add? I filed a facilities complaint 2 weeks ago about the stairwell lighting on the north side of the building, Emily said. I'd appreciate an update on that. Sloan blinked. They were out of the meeting in 11 minutes. In the corridor, Barrera walked 3 steps before allowing herself a small exhale. Somebody leaned on them hard enough to open the process, but didn't give them anything solid enough to actually use. That's sloppy. He was counting on me not showing up, or showing up scared. Either way, the meeting's now on record, and it's empty. That's actually better for you than if they'd had something real. Barrera tucked her legal pad under her arm. Go to work. Document this meeting yourself, tonight, in writing. Time, attendees, what was said. Send a copy to your personal email. Already planning to. Barrera almost smiled. I believe you. She offered her hand. Call me if anything changes. Emily worked her shift. 8 hours, not 12. She was off the overnight rotation until the following week. She moved through the floor with the particular focus of someone who needed the work to be real, to be grounded in something that wasn't the geopolitical chess game happening around her life. Bay 7 had a man recovering from a cardiac event who kept trying to pull his IV line and told her 3 separate times that he felt fine and could go home. She explained 3 separate times, with varying levels of patience, why that was not the plan. He told her she was bossy. She told him he was welcome to discuss it with his cardiologist. He subsided. Bay 2 had a teenager who'd come in with what her parents insisted was food poisoning and what Emily's assessment strongly suggested was something else. She flagged it quietly for the attending, who ran the right tests. The parents were upset. Emily understood why they were upset and also understood that being upset didn't change the results. She handled it as carefully as it could be handled. She was finishing her chart notes at the end of her shift when Sandra appeared in the doorway of the documentation room. "How'd it go this morning?" "It went nowhere. That was the point." Sandra leaned against the doorframe. "Barrera called me. She said you were, quote, well prepared and direct." "She's being generous." "She is not generous. She's transactional. If she said it, she meant it." Sandra paused. "You hear anything else?" "Not yet." Emily saved the chart. "Soon, I think." "How soon?" Before Emily could answer, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out. A text from Voss. "Come to this address when you're off shift. Don't stop anywhere first." Below it, an address on the east side of the city she didn't immediately recognize. And below that, 3 words that shifted the temperature of everything. "We found Reyes." Emily stood up from the workstation, closed her notebook, picked up her bag. "I have to go," she told Sandra. "Emily, I'll call you when I can." She was already moving. She was halfway to the elevator when her phone buzzed again. Not Voss this time. Not a text at all. A call. And the number was Rourke's, the detective, the one who had her initial assault statement, the one who went through local channels. She stopped walking. He'd never called her back. Not once in the days since Friday. She'd assumed the report had been routed upward and his involvement had ended. She answered. "Carter." His voice was different from the motel interview, not sharp, strained. "You need to know something before you go anywhere tonight." "I'm listening." "One of the men from Tuesday night, the one Ghost made contact with. He's been in county holding since Friday." A pause. "He asked for a deal this morning. He's talking." Emily stood completely still in the middle of the hospital corridor. "He gave us a name," Rourke said. "Same name you gave me Friday." "Hale." "Yeah." Another pause, heavier. "But there's something else. He said Hale had help from inside. Someone who had access to your hospital schedule. Someone who knew you'd be taking that exit." The corridor felt very quiet suddenly. "He say who?" Emily asked. "He said he didn't know the name, but he said the person works in this building." Rourke's voice was careful now, the way it had been when he was choosing what to commit to. "Carter. Someone inside Riverside Medical Center told them when you'd be leaving and which door you'd use." Emily looked down the corridor. The nurse's station at the far end, Perry at his desk, the attending's room to the left, the documentation room she'd just come from. "How many people had access to my schedule?" Rourke asked. She didn't answer right away, because the answer was, not many, and she already knew, without wanting to know, which names were on that short list. The question hung in the corridor air, and Emily made herself think instead of react. Who had access to her schedule? Not the general posted rotation. That was visible to the whole floor. Her specific exit time, her specific route. That was a shorter list. Charge nurse, unit coordinator. Anyone who'd been at the station when she'd mentioned the elevator being down and the stairwell being her alternate exit. She'd said it out loud. Tuesday afternoon, before the shift started, standing at the medication cart. She told Sandra the elevator was still broken and she'd take the north stairs out. Sandra, Perry, one of the attendings who'd been standing nearby, Kraus, who'd been pulling a chart and probably not listening. "Carter?" Rourke's voice came back. "You still there?" "I'm thinking." She kept her voice low, turned slightly away from the corridor. "How specific was what the informant said?" "Inside the hospital. Does that mean clinical staff, or could it be administrative? Maintenance? Security?" "He said someone who knew her schedule. Listen, that's all I've got." "Okay." She moved toward the stairwell door. The south one, not the north. and pushed through it. Concrete walls, better acoustics for a conversation she didn't want overhead. Rourke, this informant, is his statement sworn and recorded? As of 2 hours ago, yes. And Hale doesn't know he's talking. Not yet. That window closes fast. I know. She leaned against the stairwell wall. I'm going to an address tonight. Federal contact. I'll make sure they have what you just told me. A beat. Federal. He said it flatly, not as a question. There's a larger case. I don't have clearance to walk you through all of it. But what you have, the sworn statement, the name, that needs to be in the federal file tonight, not sitting in a local evidence chain. Silence on his end. She could feel him recalibrating, the same way he'd done in the alley when he'd walked in expecting a victim. You're telling me to root my own evidence. I'm telling you that if Hale has people inside local channels, your informant's safety depends on how fast this moves up the ladder. She paused. You know I'm right. Another silence, longer. I'll make a call. Thank you. She meant it. Document that you called me. Time and content. It protects you. She ended the call and stood in the stairwell for exactly 30 seconds. Let the information settle into its proper place. Not panic, not urgency that made you sloppy, just a recalibration of the terrain. Someone in this building had given her schedule to the men in the alley. That was the new fact. Everything else she thought she'd known about the boundaries of this thing had just gotten smaller and closer. She took the south exit and didn't look back. The address Voss had sent was a field office annex, not the main building, which was too visible, but a secondary location in a converted commercial space on Ardell Street that looked from the outside like a mid-tier insurance office. The signage said Meridian Consulting. The door required a keycard. Kellner was waiting outside and walked her in without speaking. The interior was plain: a conference table, 4 chairs, a whiteboard that had been partially erased and still showed fragments of a flow diagram in blue marker. Voss was on the phone when Emily entered and ended the call within 30 seconds of seeing her face. You heard from Rourke, Voss said. He called on my way out. Emily sat down. Your informant's talking. I know. We've been coordinating with County Holdings since this afternoon. Voss pulled out the chair across from her and sat. The statement names Hale directly for organizing the assault. It also corroborates 3 of the financial transactions in Dre's wire. It's useful. There's a source inside the hospital. We're working on that. Voss's voice didn't change, but something in her posture did. A slight forward shift, the kind of micro-adjustment that meant she was moving into a part of the conversation she'd been managing. We have a working hypothesis. Tell me. Someone in hospital administration made calls to Hale's office twice in the past month. We have the records from the financial wire, so his office line was included in the surveillance scope. The calls came from an extension registered to a mid-level administrator, scheduling and operations division. Voss paused. Name is Fowler, Colin Fowler. You know him? Emily searched her memory. I've seen him at department meetings. He handles shift allocation for the overnight rotation. He would have... She stopped. He would have access to exit protocol documentation. When the elevator went down, maintenance filed a report, and the accommodation routing went through his office. He'd have known I was using the north stairwell before I'd told anyone on the floor. The calls to Hale's office came before Tuesday. Voss watched her. He didn't hear you say it at the medication cart. He already knew. The pieces shifted and resettled. Emily had spent 3 days assuming the leak was someone who'd overheard something incidental. The possibility that it had been deliberate, that someone had been fed into position specifically to monitor her, changed the architecture of what she was dealing with. How deep does Hale's reach go inside that building? She asked. Fowler appears to be the only hospital contact, but we don't have full visibility yet. Voss leaned forward. Here's what we do have. Paloma Reyes. She opened a folder and turned it so Emily could read the first page. Photograph clipped to the top. A woman in her early 30s, dark hair, a candid shot that looked like it had been taken at some distance. Below it, a summary. Reyes had worked at Larkvale Kennels for 11 months, ending 8 weeks ago. She'd left without giving notice, which her former supervisor had logged as a voluntary quit. What her supervisor hadn't logged, and what had come to Voss's office through a chain Emily didn't fully follow, was that Reyes had made contact with a legal aid organization in the city 3 weeks after leaving Larkvale. She'd come in asking about whistleblower protections. The attorney she'd spoken to had flagged the inquiry to a federal contact, which was how Voss had first heard her name. Then Reyes had stopped responding to outreach for 6 weeks. "We found her this morning," Voss said. "She's in the city. She's been staying with a cousin in the Millfield neighborhood, off-grid, cash only. She's not hurt." A pause. "She's scared enough that she won't come in voluntarily. But she'll talk to someone she doesn't see as institutional," Emily said. Voss looked at her. "She's 29 years old. She spent 11 months watching what happened at Larkvale. According to the legal aid notes, she has direct first-hand knowledge of the facility's actual operations, not just the front-of-house kennel activity." She let that land. "She needs someone who isn't a federal agent and isn't coming in as an authority figure." "You want me to talk to her?" "I want to offer you that option. It's not a requirement. You're a civilian, your cooperation is voluntary, and if you say no, we find another approach." Voss's voice was level. "But she's a former animal welfare worker. You came into this through an animal welfare complaint, and you're not a lawyer or a badge. That matters to someone who's been hiding from authority for 6 weeks." Emily looked at Rhea's photograph for a moment. 29. 11 months inside whatever Larkvale actually was. 6 weeks living at a cousin's place off the grid because she was too scared to come out. "When?" Emily asked. "Tomorrow morning. I'll be outside in the car. You go in as yourself." Emily nodded. "I need something from you first." "Name it." "Fowler. Colin Fowler. I go back to that building every shift. If he's reporting my movements to Hale, I need him off the floor before I walk back in." Voss didn't hesitate. "He'll be placed on administrative leave by tomorrow morning. Hospital Legal is already cooperating with us through a sealed request. He won't know the specific reason. We're not showing our hand yet. He'll tell Hale something's wrong. Let him." For the first time, something in Voss's expression hardened at the edges. Hale making moves when he's already this far into our documentation is exactly what we need him to do. The meeting with Paloma Reyes happened at 9 a.m. in the Millfield neighborhood, in a first-floor apartment that smelled like old carpet and someone's breakfast. The cousin, a quiet man who'd opened the door and then immediately found somewhere else to be, clearly wanted this whole situation resolved as much as anyone. Reyes was sitting at the kitchen table when Emily came in. She'd expected someone visibly shaken, on the edge, the look that fear produced after long exposure. What she got was more complicated. Reyes was composed in the specific way that came not from calm, but from having been afraid for so long that the fear had calcified into something harder. She looked at Emily the way someone looks at a door they haven't decided whether to open yet. Emily sat across from her, didn't produce anything. No notepad, no phone on the table, nothing that looked like documentation. "I'm not here to record you," Emily said. "I'm not wired. You want to check? You can." Reyes studied her. "You're the one from the hospital, the nurse." "Yes. They told me someone got attacked outside Riverside." A flat statement, not quite a question. "I got attacked outside Riverside," Emily said. 3 men, coordinated. Set up by the same person who ran the operation you worked at." Something shifted in Reyes's face. Not surprise. Recognition. "He found out I left," Reyes said. I thought if I just disappeared quietly, didn't make noise, he'd leave me alone." "He might have, but someone else picked up your name in a legal aid inquiry, and it ended up in a federal file." Reyes closed her eyes for a moment. "I just wanted to know my options." "I know. And those options still exist, but the case is bigger than it was 6 weeks ago, and what you know is part of it." Emily leaned forward slightly. "What did you see at Larkvale?" A long silence. Reyes looked at the table. "The dogs up front, the breeding side. That's real. It's not the problem." She stopped. "Try it again." "There's a back section. You can't see it from the public access points. I found it by accident, 3rd month, when a water line burst, and I had to route through the east maintenance corridor to get to the storage room." She paused. "It's not dogs back there." Emily waited. "It's processing," Reyes said, "for animals brought in under different documentation than the ones in the front facility, moving through fast, in, processed, out. The paperwork lists them as livestock transfers, but the volume doesn't match any agricultural operation. It's a pass-through. Whatever's actually being moved, the animals are the cover. She looked up. I overheard two men talking once. They didn't see me. One of them mentioned a name, Pruitt. Emily's notebook was in her bag. She didn't reach for it. Did you see the documentation yourself? Emily asked. Some of it. Enough to know the intake records didn't match what was coming in. The species classifications were wrong, deliberately wrong. Wildlife, Emily said. Not a question. Reyes nodded. Once. Small. Protected species. I don't know which one specifically, but what I saw wasn't domestic livestock, and nobody was asking questions about it. The room was very quiet. Emily sat with it for a moment. Financial crimes, money laundering, an assault on a nurse who'd filed an animal welfare complaint. All of it had felt like it added up to corruption and intimidation. Real enough, serious enough. But protected wildlife trafficking pushed it into a different category entirely. Federal jurisdiction that extended far beyond a financial crimes wire. Paloma. Emily used her first name carefully. Are you willing to give a statement? Not today, not under pressure, but at some point, with legal representation. Reyes looked at her hands on the table. What happens to me if I do? You'd have witness protections in place. Housing, legal support, identity shielding during the process. Emily paused. I'm not going to tell you it's comfortable. It's a process, and it takes time, and it's not clean. But hail goes down. Yes. Reyes was quiet for a long time, long enough that Emily stopped expecting a quick answer and let her have the silence. I have a daughter, Reyes said. She's 4. She's with my sister right now. I've been telling her I'm working a job out of town. She looked up. If I do this, I need her protected too. That can be arranged. That's standard in witness protection protocols. Standard. Reyes said the word like she was testing its weight. Okay? Another pause. Okay. I'll talk. Emily left the apartment 40 minutes later. Voss was waiting in the sedan half a block down. Emily got in, and before Voss could ask, she said, Wildlife trafficking, protected species being moved through Larkvale using falsified livestock documentation. The dog breeding operation is a front for the pass-through. She has direct observation, and she's willing to testify. Voss stared at her for a half second. Then she pulled out her phone and made a call. I need Mercer on the line right now. While Voss talked, Emily looked out the window at the Millfield street. A woman walking a toddler past a chain-link fence. A man loading boxes into a van. The ordinary daylight of a city that didn't know what was running through its infrastructure. She thought about Dre's financial wire. 14 months of work. She thought about the Inspector Greer who'd left town. She thought about Fowler in the scheduling office, making calls he thought nobody would trace. She thought about 3 men in an alley who'd been given a door and a time and a name. Wildlife trafficking changed the scope. It brought in agencies that operated outside the local circuit entirely. It meant Hale's operation wasn't just money laundering through a kennel. It was an international supply chain using Blackstone City as a node. The bribery, the corrupt officials, the intimidation, all of it was infrastructure to protect something much larger than a breeding fraud. Voss ended the call. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has an existing case file. Mercer's been sitting on it, waiting for a ground-level witness. She turned to Emily. This is going federal in a way that supersedes the financial crimes wire. Dre's timeline just became irrelevant. How fast? Days, not weeks. Voss started the car. We're moving to a coordinated action protocol. Multiple agencies, simultaneous. Hale won't have time to root around it. She pulled into traffic. I need you to go back to Riverside tonight and work your shift. Emily looked at her. You're keeping me visible. If you disappear, he knows something's happening. You stay in your routine, keep the target pattern consistent, and he thinks he still has time to manage this. Voss checked her mirror. You've been doing this for 7 months. 2 more days isn't going to break you. It's not me I'm worried about. Emily thought about Reyes in that kitchen, about the cousin who'd opened the door and wanted it all to be over. Reyes needs to be moved tonight, not tomorrow. Already in motion. Kellner's coordinating with the protection detail now. Voss glanced at her. You did well in there. Emily didn't answer. She was already thinking about the overnight shift, about walking back through those doors knowing Fowler had been feeding information out of the building, about doing 12 hours of patient care while a federal operation assembled itself around a situation she'd started by filing an animal welfare complaint. Her phone buzzed. She checked it. A text from a number she'd never seen. No name. And the content made her hand go still against the seat. They moved her already. You're too late. She stared at it. Her first thought was Reyes, but Reyes was safe. The cousin's apartment. The protection detail was in motion. Her second thought caught up a half-second later, cold and specific. Not Reyes. Sandra. She called Sandra's cell. 3 rings. 4. Voicemail. She called the nurses' station at Riverside. The unit coordinator, Perry, answered on the first ring, and his voice had the particular tight quality of someone trying to sound normal when something was wrong. Perry, where's Sandra? A pause that lasted 1 beat too long. She left about an hour ago, he said. HR called her down, said there was a follow-up meeting about the union complaint. Another pause. She hasn't come back up. Emily's hand tightened on the phone. Who called her? It came through the front desk. They said it was Sloan. Sloan, the HR director, whose office Emily had been in less than 12 hours ago, sitting across from a man who'd had nothing and known it. Perry, listen to me. Don't say my name out loud right now. Go to the 3rd floor and tell Dr. Krause that Carter needs a welfare check on Mejia now. Don't use the intercom. Don't call HR. Just go directly to Krause. Go. She lowered the phone. Voss had heard enough of it to have already picked up her own line. Emily said, steady and flat. Someone's taken Sandra Mejia, my charge nurse. They used a fake HR call to pull her out of the unit. Voss was already talking to Kellner on the other line, and Emily was already running through every angle. Sandra didn't know specifics. Sandra had just called a union rep and mentioned Hale's name on the phone 3 days ago. Sandra had said that name to Emily in a conversation she hadn't thought about being monitored because she hadn't known about Fowler yet. But Fowler had been in the building. Fowler's access ran through scheduling and operations, which shared a server with HR communications. If he'd had eyes on Emily's movements, he'd had ears on the floor. And Sandra had said the name out loud. Voss. Emily's voice came out low and controlled and absolutely certain. We don't have days. We need to move now. Voss made the call before the car had traveled 2 blocks. Not Kellner this time. Someone higher. Someone whose number she dialed without looking it up. And the conversation lasted 40 seconds and was almost entirely Voss speaking in shorthand that Emily caught enough of to understand that whatever careful, measured timeline they'd been operating on had just been compressed into something that required different resources. She ended the call and took the next turn hard. Talk to me about Sandra Mejia. Who knows she's connected to you? She called Barrera on Saturday. My name came up. She mentioned Hale's name on her cell. Emily was already running backward through it. Fowler's server access covered HR communications and scheduling. If he had visibility into call logs on hospital extensions, he might have flagged her name after the HR meeting Monday. She was in the room. So they know she's a potential witness. Or they're using her as leverage to get me to stop cooperating. Emily looked out the window. Millfield giving way to the arterial roads leading back to the city center. Sandra doesn't know the operational details. She knows my name and Hale's name, and that I have a federal contact. That's enough to make her a liability to him, even if she's not useful as a source. Voss's jaw tightened. Kellner's already at Riverside. He's pulling building security footage from the past 90 minutes. HR called her through the front desk. If Fowler's already off the floor, someone else made that call. Or Fowler made it before he got the administrative leave notice. The timing is close. Voss accelerated through a yellow. Do you have any red on where they'd take her? Any locations connected to Hale you haven't already put in your documentation? Emily thought. The 9 business entities? The property holding companies? There's a warehouse property in the Kessler district. One of the Shell LLCs has it listed as a distribution facility. It doesn't correspond to any active business I could find when I was compiling the summary. She pulled up the notes on her phone. Voss, I flagged it in the documentation I gave you day one, but I didn't know what it was. Address. Emily read it out. Voss relayed it on her radio. Then she glanced sideways. You stay in this car. When we get to Riverside, you stay in the building with Kellner. You understand? Sandra is in that warehouse because of me. Sandra Mejia is in that warehouse because Victor Hale ordered it. You don't own his decisions. Voss's voice didn't soften, but there was something underneath it that wasn't coldness. The best thing you can do for her right now is not become a second situation I have to manage. Emily didn't argue, not because Voss was wrong, but because arguing would have been the emotional response, and she'd spent the last 7 months training herself out of those. She sat with her hands flat on her thighs and let the city move past the window and thought about Sandra walking into a fake HR meeting because someone had used the right name and the right extension, and Sandra was the kind of person who showed up when called because that was who she was. The radio crackled. A voice Emily didn't recognize confirmed units en route to the Kessler district address. Another voice confirmed a tactical element available and staged. Voss acknowledged both and said something Emily didn't catch because her phone was buzzing again. Not a text this time. A call. The number was Rourke's. She answered. We have a development, Rourke said. No preamble. The informant, the one in County Holding, he tried to recant 20 minutes ago. Said he made the whole thing up. Then he immediately asked for protective custody, which means someone got to him and he's scared enough to flip his story, but smart enough to know he needs to get out of general population first. Someone told Hale he was talking. That would be my read, yes. She thought about Fowler, about the administrative leave notice that had gone through hospital legal. How many hands had that touched before it reached Fowler's desk? Rourke, was your informant's name in any local document that could have been accessed through administrative channels? A pause. The county holding intake process involves a shared record system that's accessible to... He stopped. She heard him work through it. Yeah, it's accessible to a fairly wide administrative pool, including county offices. Pruitt, the county board member whose name had appeared in the Shell LLC filing. Pruitt, who'd photographed with the sheriff at a chamber banquet. Your informant still has the sworn statement on record, Emily said. The recant doesn't erase the original. Make sure that recording is physically secured, not just in the digital system, a hard copy somewhere that doesn't touch the shared records network. Already done. A beat. I did that this morning after you told me to document everything. Turns out that was good advice. Keep him in protective custody. Don't let the recant process further until you've talked to Voss's office. I've been trying to reach Voss for the past 10 minutes. She's a little busy. Emily looked at the road ahead. She'll call you back within the hour. She relayed the informant situation to Voss as they pulled into the Riverside Medical Center main structure. Voss absorbed it without expression. Pruitt's been on a secondary list for 3 weeks. We didn't have enough to move on him. She parked and turned off the engine. We have enough now. Inside, the hospital floor had the particular controlled tension of a place where most people didn't know anything was wrong, but a few people did. Perry was at the nurse's station, and the relief on his face when he saw Emily was genuine and immediate, and he covered it badly. Krause is in the attending lounge, he said quietly. Kellner was standing near the elevator bank in plain clothes, doing a reasonable impression of someone waiting for a floor. He gave Emily a small nod. She went to the attending lounge. Krause was a tall man in his 50s who'd been at Riverside for 20 years and had the specific quality of a person who was good in emergencies specifically because he didn't take any pleasure in them. He was sitting with a coffee he wasn't drinking. You know what's happening, Emily said. I know Sandra left for an HR meeting and hasn't come back, and 2 people who are clearly federal agents are standing in my hospital. He looked at her. Is she safe? We're working on that. He nodded, set the coffee down. What do you need from me? Nothing right now. I need you to keep the floor running normally. If anyone asks about Sandra, she's in a meeting. If anyone from HR, specifically Sloan, tries to come up here, you call me before you let him through. Krause looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man who was deciding something. You've been working this for a while. 7 months. Did you know it would get here? I knew something would happen. I didn't know what shape it would take. She paused. Krause, The administrative leave on Fowler. Did you hear about that? Came through at 7 this morning. No reason given. He picked up the coffee again, more for something to do with his hands. I never liked Fowler. He always knew things about shift schedules that he had no operational reason to know. I thought he was just a gossip. He was a little more than that. She left Kraus with his coffee and went to the workstation at the end of the corridor. Kellner appeared beside her within 30 seconds. Footage from building security, he said quietly, placing a still image printout on the counter. 47 minutes ago. Sandra, in her charge nurse ID badge and scrubs, walking through the lobby with a man Emily didn't recognize on either side of her. Not touching her, not visibly coercive. 2 men, business casual, walking alongside her like colleagues. Anyone watching from a distance would have seen 3 people leaving a building together. Emily looked at the man on Sandra's left. Youngish, heavy-set, dark jacket. She'd seen that build before. In an alley. At night. That's one of them, she said. From Tuesday. Kellner's phone was already out. The Kessler District Warehouse had been flagged, staged, and entered by a federal tactical element and 2 local units in coordination by 11:40 a.m. Emily found out through Voss's call at 11:58, sitting in a break room at Riverside with coffee she wasn't tasting, ghost at her feet because Kellner had made the executive decision that the dog's presence was more useful inside than in the car. Sandra was safe. That was the first thing Voss said. She's shaken. She has a bruised wrist from where one of them grabbed her in the parking structure. They got her before she reached HR. She never actually made it to Sloan's office. She's being transported to the Meridian Annex for a medical evaluation and a statement. A pause. She was there for less than an hour. They hadn't decided what to do with her yet. They were waiting to hear from Hale. That's our read. He didn't authorize anything beyond containment because he was still managing the informant situation and he didn't want to add another variable until he had a cleaner picture. Voss's voice was even, but Emily could hear what was underneath it, the specific tightness that came from an operation moving faster than its original plan. The 2 men at the warehouse are in custody. One of them is the individual from Tuesday's assault. The other is a man named Torrance, who has prior federal charges in 2 other states. Did they talk? One of them is asking for a deal. The other is asking for a lawyer, and then also asking for a deal. We'll see which conversation goes further. Another pause. Emily, this is moving. Everything that's been static for months is moving now. Hale knows. He knows something collapsed. He doesn't know how much. His attorney made contact with the county DA's office 40 minutes ago. A phishing call, trying to gauge exposure. She heard paper move on Voss's end. That call tells us he's scared and he's not sure what his insiders have and haven't contained. That's where we want him. Emily sat back. Ghost put his chin on her knee. The raids, Emily said. When? Coordination call is at 2 p.m. U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the Financial Crimes Unit, our office, and county law enforcement. The units we've vetted, not the ones touching Pruitt's network. Voss's voice shifted slightly. I need you to stay at Riverside until I give you clearance to move. You're the consistent element he's been watching. If you suddenly disappear, it signals him. I know. I'll work the shift. How are you doing? It wasn't a question she'd expected from Voss. The directness of it caught her off guard in a way that 3 days of assault and surveillance and a federal operation hadn't quite managed. I'm functional, Emily said. That's not what I asked. She thought about it honestly. Sandra's okay. That's the thing that was going to break me if it went wrong. She's okay, so I'm okay. A pause. Ask me again in 48 hours. I will, Voss said, and meant it, apparently. Bah. The 2 p.m. coordination call she wasn't party to. She worked the floor. Bay 4, Bay 7, a new intake in Bay 12 who'd come in through the ER with a suspected spinal injury and needed the kind of stabilization and monitoring that required full attention and got it. Perry brought her a granola bar at hour 4, and she ate it standing at the charting station and was grateful in a very specific way for the mundane fact of it. At 4:30, Kellner appeared in the corridor and held up 3 fingers, then pointed toward the exit. 3 hours. She nodded. He disappeared. At 6:15, Rourke called again. His voice had changed, not strained now, but carrying the particular quality of someone who was reporting something they'd spent a long time trying to make happen and couldn't quite believe had arrived. Pruitt, he said, county board member. He was arrested 40 minutes ago at his office. Financial crimes and our office joint. A pause. He didn't make it to his car. What did they find? I'm not fully read in, but from what I heard, the financial records in his office safe matched 3 of the transaction patterns in the Federal Wire. He had documentation in his own desk, Emily. He thought he was protected. Another pause. Nobody told him that the man protecting him was 2 hours away from losing everything. She thought about Pruitt at the zoning meeting, the carefully calibrated way he'd spoken, the banquet photos. Has Hale been notified that Pruitt's in custody? His attorney would have been called, so yes, by now. Rourke exhaled. The walls are coming in fast. Good. She meant it in a way that didn't feel like satisfaction so much as the particular relief of watching a structure that's been leaning for a long time finally make contact with the ground. After she hung up, she stood for a moment in the break room doorway and thought about 7 months. The first complaint that went nowhere. The second inspection that found nothing. The notebook with 43 pages. The night she'd run the math on whether she was building something or just documenting her own irrelevance. The moment in a motel room when she'd decided to answer a number she didn't know. Perry appeared in the corridor. You need anything? I'm good. He started to leave, then turned back. For what it's worth. What you did? Nobody else on this floor would have kept going that long. He said it quickly, like he'd been holding it for a while and wanted to get it out before he talked himself out of it. That's all. He left before she could respond. She was glad. She didn't have the right words for it, and she wasn't sure she was supposed to yet. At 7:42 p.m., Voss texted, It's happening. Stay put 10 more minutes, then come to Meridian. Emily finished her charting, handed off to the incoming overnight nurse, told Krause she was leaving, and he nodded in the way of a man who understood more than he was being told, and had decided that was enough. She was in the elevator when the alerts started hitting the local news network. She didn't see them in real time, but she felt the moment change, the way Kellner's posture shifted when he met her in the lobby, the way the radio on his hip crackled with an energy that wasn't procedural anymore. It's running, he said. Larkvale? Larkvale. The Meridian Shell property on Route 9, the distribution address in the Kessler district, 2 properties in the outer county that weren't in your documentation but showed up in the Financial Wire. He held the door for her. Simultaneous. All of them. Ghost came through the door beside her, and they crossed the parking structure at a pace that wasn't quite running but covered ground. In the car, she pulled up the local news on her phone. The headlines were already forming, the way they did when multiple simultaneous events broke too fast for the news cycle to catch up. Fragmentary, contradictory. The gaps where facts hadn't arrived yet filled with terse official statements. Federal agents execute search warrants at multiple Blackstone City locations. Larkvale Kennels Facility. Raided by Joint Federal Task Force County. Official taken into custody in ongoing federal investigation. She put the phone down. The Meridian Annex was operational in a way it hadn't been before. 3 more cars in the lot, lights on in rooms that had been dark. The particular controlled bustle of a location that had shifted from planning to execution. Inside, Voss was at the conference table with 2 people Emily didn't know, and a laptop open to a live feed from what appeared to be a drone view of Larkvale. Sandra was in the side office. Emily saw her through the window, and Sandra saw her at the same moment, and did something she'd never done in 4 years on the same hospital floor. She looked like she was about to cry, and then visibly decided against it, and compressed it into something that looked almost like her usual expression. Emily went in, closed the door. Sandra's wrist was wrapped. Her face was tired in a way that went past the physical. They told me you're the one who figured out where I was. I knew the address. I'd been looking at his properties for months. So essentially you saved my life. You called Barrera for me on a Saturday night, Emily said. We're even. Sandra looked at her for a long moment. The man who called my extension. He used Sloane's name and spoke like he'd been in that building for years. He knew the internal extension format. He knew my name and title. A pause. It was Fowler, wasn't it? We think he made the call before he got the administrative leave notice. He had maybe a 30-minute window. Emily sat in the chair across from her. Sandra, I need you to know that you were targeted because of proximity to me, not because of anything you did or said. I said Hale's name on my cell phone. You said it to protect a nurse on your floor. That's not a mistake. That's who you are. Sandra looked away, looked back. What happens now? Now the people who built this thing watch it come apart. That's happening right now. Emily glanced toward the conference room where Voss was managing the live feeds. You'll need to give a formal statement about what happened today. A federal attorney will be with you. After that, they'll arrange transport to somewhere safe for the next few days until Hale is formally in custody. He's not in custody yet? Not yet. Emily checked her phone. Nothing from Voss. Soon. Victor Hale was, at the moment, his properties were being simultaneously entered by federal and state agents at his estate on the northern edge of Blackstone City. The estate had a name. His wife had named it, years ago, something about the Ridge, and it had 12 rooms and a gated entrance and a security system that cost more annually than most people earned. None of that was particularly useful on a Tuesday evening when 4 vehicles with federal markings and a county sheriff's unit came through the gate before the gate had been given instructions to stop them. Emily found out the details later, in pieces. The way these things assembled themselves after the fact from reports and testimony, and the single security camera at the estate's entrance that kept recording regardless of who was arriving or why. Hale had been in his study. His attorney was on the phone. One of his household staff answered the door and was professionally and courteously asked to step aside, and then federal agents were in the entry hall with a warrant and a list. She heard that he came out of the study calmly, that he looked at the warrant with the expression of a man who had spent decades being the one who decided how situations resolved, and the expression took a long time to adjust to the new information. He apparently said nothing for the first several minutes, not the theatrical silence of a man making a statement or so, just the particular blankness of someone whose model of the world had stopped matching what was in front of them. His attorney arrived within 20 minutes. It didn't change the trajectory of the evening. At 9:17 p.m., Voss set her phone down on the Meridian conference table and looked at Emily and said, "He's in custody." The room was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of relief, the quiet of something large coming to rest after a long time in motion. Then the agents around the table began making calls, and the operational tempo of the room returned to its baseline, and it was just work again, the way it always became just work on the other side of the moment. Emily sat with it. Ghost was under the table near her feet. She thought about the alley, about the weight of an arm across her throat and her feet leaving the ground and the particular calculus she'd done in that fraction of a second. The whistle, the window, the 4 seconds that had kept everything else possible. She thought about 43 pages, about a notebook in a kitchen drawer, about every moment she'd decided not to stop. Voss sat down across from her with 2 cups of coffee, bad coffee, the same Annex machine, and set one in front of her. Hale's attorney is already negotiating his posture for arraignment, Voss said. Wildlife trafficking charges at the federal level carry substantial sentencing exposure, money laundering, federal witness intimidation. That's you by name. The assault charge is state but coordinates with the federal case. She wrapped both hands around her own cup. He's going to try to minimize. That's what attorneys do. What he can't minimize is the volume of physical evidence recovered tonight. Larkvale alone gave us enough to document the pass-through operation across an 18-month period. Reyes's testimony is corroborated. Multiple times over, Voss paused. Paloma Reyes will be a significant witness. She'll need preparation and support through the process, but she's the one who can describe the operation from the inside. That's rare. That's the difference between a case that convicts on financial records alone, complicated, slower, and a case that has a human face. Juries respond to that. Emily thought about Reyes at the kitchen table. I have a daughter. She's 4. She held on for 6 weeks with no institutional support and a 4-year-old, and she still showed up. Make sure her housing is stable and her daughter's protected. Already in the protocol. Voss looked at her. You know, when I pressed my card into your hand at the zoning meeting, I thought you might call within a few weeks. Maybe a month? I wasn't ready. No, you were thorough. A pause. There's a difference, and it mattered. Emily didn't respond to that directly. She looked at the whiteboard with its partially erased flow diagram, the remains of some earlier planning session, and thought about the shape of the past 7 months and how it would look from the outside, stripped of the nights and the doubt and the maintenance work orders that never got filled. It would look like a straight line. It never was. She was about to say something to Voss when Kellner appeared in the doorway with his phone in his hand and an expression that had gone carefully neutral in the way that meant something specific. "What?" Emily said. "Fowler," Kellner said. "When HR security went to formally serve him the administrative leave paperwork this afternoon, he wasn't at home. We had his address from hospital records." He looked at his phone. He wasn't at his secondary contact address either. His car is at his apartment. His phone last pinged a tower in the Kessler district at 10:48 this morning. The Kessler district. The warehouse. Before the tactical element arrived. "He was there," Emily said. "He was at the warehouse when Sandra was there." "He wasn't found in the sweep." Kellner's voice stayed flat. "The 2 men in custody from the warehouse. Neither of them has mentioned him. We don't know if they're protecting him or if they genuinely didn't see him leave." Voss had already stood up. The room around Emily continued its organized activity. Calls, coordination, documentation. And she sat with the new shape of the thing. Hale was in custody. Pruitt was in custody. 2 of the men from the assault were in custody. The informant's sworn statement was secured. Reyes was protected. Sandra was safe. But Fowler, who knew the hospital's internal systems, who knew Emily's schedule, who had access to staff records and shift documentation, and had been sitting inside Riverside Medical Center for months feeding information outward, Fowler was somewhere in the city. And he knew where Emily worked. He knew her schedule. He knew which exit she used and which days she ran late, and what her car looked like in the parking structure. And he had nothing left to lose. Her phone buzzed. Perry's number. She answered. "Emily?" Perry's voice was low, the way it got when he was trying not to be heard. "There's a man at the nurse's station asking for you. He's not a patient, and he's not family of a patient." A pause, very short. "He said he works in administration. He says his name is Fowler." "Perry." Emily's voice dropped to the register she used when things needed to happen fast and quietly. "Don't engage with him. Walk away from the station naturally. Go to the attending lounge and stay there with Kraus. Don't tell anyone else on the floor." "Emily, what?" "Go, now." She was already standing. Across the table, Voss had read her face and was on her feet before Emily said a word. "Fowler, he's at the hospital, 3rd floor nurses' station." The room shifted. Kellner was moving. Voss was on the radio. Emily was calculating the distance between the Meridian Annex and Riverside Medical Center, 11 minutes in normal traffic, 7 if Voss pushed it, and running the floor layout in her head at the same time. 3rd floor nurses' station, 12 meters from the elevator bank, 8 meters from the south stairwell, 20 meters from Bay 4 where 2 patients were currently on monitoring equipment that required staff attention every 40 minutes. Ghost was already beside her. "You ride with me," Voss said. It wasn't a question. They were in the car in 40 seconds. Kellner took a second vehicle with a county unit that had been staged at the annex since the coordination call. Voss drove with the kind of focused aggression that came from knowing exactly what a car could do at speed and not enjoying it, just using it. "What does Fowler want?" Voss said, not looking at her. "He wants leverage. He's got nothing else." Emily thought through it as she talked. Hale's in custody. His access to the hospital is suspended. Whatever protection he had from Hale's network is gone, and he knows it. He went to the warehouse this morning, which means he saw the tactical element come in. He's been loose in the city for 9 hours. She looked at the road ahead. He's not thinking clearly. A man thinking clearly doesn't walk into a hospital under his own name and ask for the person who brought the whole thing down. Desperate. Desperate and not trained. She paused. He's an administrator. He moves paperwork and accesses systems and makes phone calls. He's never been the one who did anything physical. The men at the warehouse were hired. Fowler was a conduit. So he walks in and asks for you, and then what's his plan? I don't think he has one. That was the part that made her stomach tighten. A man with a plan was manageable. A man with no plan and nothing to lose and 9 hours of free-falling panic behind him was a different category of problem. Voss ran a light at the intersection of Caldwell and Merchant. Don't go to that station when we get there. I know. I mean it. You let us clear it. I know, Voss. They came into the Riverside Medical Center main structure at 9:41. Kellner's vehicle was 30 seconds behind. Voss was out of the car while it was still rocking from the stop, and Emily was 2 steps behind her with Ghost at her left heel, and they took the main lobby entrance because it gave them the best visual line on both elevator banks. A hospital security guard near the entrance desk had already gotten the call. His posture gave it away. That particular stillness of someone who'd been told to look normal and hadn't quite managed it. Voss badged him with a motion that didn't break stride and got a low-voiced confirmation. The man at the third-floor station had been there for approximately 6 minutes and hadn't moved toward any patient areas. The elevator was waiting, doors open. They went up. The third floor was quieter than the day shift. Overnight rotation, reduced staff, monitoring lights visible through glass panels on the unit doors. Emily knew this floor the way she knew her own hands. She knew which panels squeaked and which lights flickered, and where the blind spots in the corridor cameras were. She knew the third-floor nurses' station had 3 points of approach and 1 point of visibility from the main corridor. She also knew that Perry had followed her instruction because the station was visibly understaffed for this time of night. Nobody at the front desk, the chair pushed back at an angle that meant someone had left quickly. A chart left open on the counter. Fowler was standing at the edge of the counter. He had the look of a man who'd been in motion for hours and had finally run out of road. Not physically disheveled, but the interior version of it, the kind of disarray that showed in the eyes and the set of the shoulders, and the particular way he was gripping the edge of the counter like it was the only fixed thing in a room that had started moving. He saw Emily before he saw Voss. He'd been looking for her specifically. That was clear in the way his whole body reoriented when she came around the corridor corner. Something in his expression that wasn't relief but was related to it. The specific desperation of a man who has decided that the only remaining option is to put something directly in front of the person he's been working against for months and see if that changes anything. Voss was 2 steps to her left and slightly behind. Kellner had taken the south corridor approach, county unit on the stairwell. Fowler looked at the agents and his grip on the counter tightened, and then, visibly, something in him deflated. It happened fast. One moment he was calculating, and then he wasn't. The calculation had run its course, and there was nothing on the other side of it. I didn't know what he was going to do to her, he said. His voice came out at a register that was trying for steadiness and not finding it. The Mejia woman. I didn't know they were going to take her. Mr. Fowler. Voss's voice was even. I need you to step away from the counter and keep your hands visible. He stepped back. Hands came up, not quite raised, the gesture of a man who'd watched enough television to know the shape of this moment. Ghost had stopped moving and was watching him with the specific quality of attention that meant assessment without decision, waiting to see if the situation required anything further. It didn't. Fowler sat down in the chair Perry had vacated. Kellner came around the south corridor and confirmed the rest of the station was clear, and the county officer appeared from the stairwell, and the thing that Emily had been managing toward for 7 months compressed itself into a 60-second sequence that ended with Colin Fowler in handcuffs, seated in a hospital chair, asking in a quiet and somewhat bewildered voice for an attorney. Emily stood at the edge of it. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt tired in the specific way that came after sustained effort finally found its conclusion. Not the satisfaction of a thing completed so much as the simple physical fact of being able to stop running. Perry emerged from the attending lounge down the corridor, looked at the scene, looked at Emily. Told you to stay with Kraus, she said. Kraus came with me. He gestured behind him, and Kraus appeared in the doorway, looking exactly like a man who had followed an instruction he'd already decided was optional. We figured there's safety in numbers. She didn't have the energy to argue with that logic. But the next 3 hours were the procedural aftermath of everything breaking at once. Fowler was transported to county, processed, and placed in a facility that had no overlap with Hale's existing protective network. Voss had been specific about that, and the specificity came from the lesson of the first informant's recant. This time there were no shared record systems, no administrative pools with wide access, no pathways for a message to move from a cell to an ally. Emily gave a supplemental statement at the Meridian Annex at midnight. Voss recorded it. The statement covered Fowler's appearance at the station, the preceding call from Perry, and the sequence of events over the past 12 hours as she'd experienced them. She spoke for 22 minutes and answered clarifying questions for another 8, and then Voss turned off the recorder and told her she was done for the night. Sandra had been transported to a protected location earlier in the evening. She texted Emily at 12:40 a.m. The message was brief, 2 sentences. They told me it's over. I want a full debrief when you're ready. Emily wrote back, soon, sleep. She got a response that was just a punctuation mark, which was the most Sandra-like thing she could have said. She slept at the Caldwell that night, the same room. Ghost on the floor. She didn't review anything. She didn't make notes. She lay down and closed her eyes, and the next thing she knew, it was 7 a.m., and the room was full of flat morning light, and Ghost was sitting next to the bed watching her with the patient certainty of a dog who had decided it was time to be noticed. She got up, made the terrible coffee, called Joel. He answered before it finished ringing the first time, which meant he'd been awake for a while. Tell me. It's over, she said. Hale's in custody. Everyone connected to it is either in custody or being processed. Sandra's safe. I'm safe. Ghost is fine. A silence that had several things in it at once. When you say over, criminal charges filed, federal jurisdiction, physical evidence at multiple locations. He's not getting out of this. She sat at the desk by the window. It's going to take months to work through the courts. But the part where someone is following me and filing fake HR complaints and trying to shut me down, that part is done. She heard him exhale. It was the sound of someone releasing something they'd been holding for a long time in a very small space. I want to come out there. Give me 2 weeks to get my apartment back in order. 2 weeks, he said, like he was writing it down. Joel, I'm okay. I want you to know that I'm actually okay, not just functional okay. Yeah. His voice was rough in the way it got when he was keeping something contained. Yeah, I hear you. A pause. The kids drew pictures for you. Mia made you and Ghost. Ghost is bigger than the building. She smiled. It felt unfamiliar on her face after the past week. Tell her that's accurate. Victor Hale's arraignment happened on a Thursday, 9 days after his arrest. Emily wasn't in the courtroom. She watched the news coverage on her phone during a break between patients, standing in the corridor outside Bay 9, and saw 30 seconds of footage of Hale being walked into the courthouse in a suit that still cost more than most people's monthly salary and an expression that had finished its adjustment to the new reality and arrived somewhere flat and contained. The charges were read publicly: federal wildlife trafficking, money laundering through commercial enterprise, conspiracy to commit witness intimidation, obstruction of justice, and filed in coordination with state prosecutors, solicitation to commit assault in the first degree. That one was Emily's alley, her name in a charge document. 3 words she hadn't thought she'd see in a courthouse filing when she'd first written a complaint about kennel conditions 7 months ago. His attorney entered a not guilty plea on all counts, which was standard and meant nothing about what would eventually happen. What mattered was the evidence, and the evidence was substantial enough that Voss had used the word extensive in a tone that wasn't boasting, just describing. Pruitt had already entered a cooperation agreement with federal prosecutors by the time Hale's arraignment happened. He provided documentation of 4 years of payments from Hale-affiliated entities routed through county board accounts. He gave testimony about 3 instances in which he'd intervened to redirect or suppress regulatory complaints about Larkvale, including Emily's second animal services report. He gave the names of 2 other county officials who'd received payments. Both of those officials were suspended pending investigation within 48 hours of Pruitt's cooperation becoming known. Fowler, in his own proceeding, provided a detailed account of his role as an information conduit inside Riverside Medical Center. He'd been approached by Hale's organization 14 months earlier, approached carefully, framed as a consulting relationship, paid through a vendor account that looked legitimate on paper. He'd provided shift schedules. He'd provided building access protocols. He'd flagged Emily's name to Hale's office the week she filed her second animal services complaint, because her name had appeared in a communication that crossed his desk, and he'd been told to report anything involving regulatory contact. He hadn't known, he said, what the information would be used for. Voss told Emily, in a dry and unsentimental tone, that this was the most common thing people in Fowler's position said, and that it also happened to be mostly irrelevant. The two men from the warehouse gave statements that corroborated the informant's original sworn testimony. Hale had authorized the assault. He had specified a location and a time window that matched exactly the information Fowler had provided. The third man from the alley, the one who had run and hadn't been recovered immediately, was picked up 11 days after the raids at a bus station in the next state, carrying a bag with $14,000 in cash and a phone with 17 unanswered calls from a number registered to one of Hale's former shell companies. The driver, the fourth man, the one who'd stayed in the sedan, turned out to be a low-level employee of one of Hale's property companies who'd been told he was driving people to a business meeting and had believed it right up until Ghost came through a car window on Tuesday night, at which point he'd driven away very fast and spent the following week in a state of private terror before turning himself in with an attorney and a cooperation offer. His statement, oddly, was one of the more useful ones. He'd driven Hale personally on 3 occasions and had overheard conversations that placed Hale's direct knowledge of the wildlife trafficking operation beyond any reasonable deniability. Paloma Reyes gave her formal statement in a secure location with Voss present and a federal attorney at her side and her daughter in a supervised play area 2 rooms over. She spoke for 3 hours. She was precise about dates and locations and what she'd seen and heard. She was not precise about her emotions during those 11 months, but she didn't need to be. The facts were sufficient, and the facts were damning. Her testimony covered not just the Larkvale pass-through operation, but a second location she hadn't mentioned in her initial conversation with Emily, a storage facility in the outer county that matched a property flagged in the financial wire, but not yet connected to the physical operation. When Voss told Emily about the second location, Emily sat quietly for a moment and then said, "She knew more than she told me. She told you what she trusted you with. She didn't fully trust anyone yet." Voss paused. "She trusts the process more now. That's how it works." The formal commendation from Riverside Medical Center's board of directors arrived in Emily's personnel file on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after the arrests. It was written in the language that institutions used when they were acknowledging something they hadn't handled well. Careful phrasing, credit given without quite admitting what had failed, the word courage appearing twice. Sandra had told her it was coming, and had also told her not to read too much into the language because the board's legal team had reviewed every word, and that was just how these things looked. What mattered, Sandra said, was that it was permanent. It sat in the file. It couldn't be pulled. The HR review was formally closed with a notation that the original complaint had been filed by an external party with no documented basis and had been processed in error. Sloan, who had opened the review on the basis of a phone call from a board member who was now under federal investigation, was still employed by the hospital and had given his own statement to federal investigators about the contact he'd received. He wasn't charged. He'd been following the direction of people he had no reason to suspect and had stopped short of any action that could be prosecuted. Emily didn't forgive him for it, but she understood the distinction between a man who had been used and a man who had made choices, and Sloan was more the former than the latter. Fowler entered a plea agreement. The agreement required full cooperation and testimony at Hale's trial in exchange for a reduced sentence. He would serve time. Not as much as the men who'd been in the alley, not as much as Hale, but time. His access to any administrative database connected to medical facilities was permanently revoked as a condition of his release. The hospital's legal team had pushed for that provision specifically. Detective Rourke called her one evening while she was cooking dinner, badly, the way she always cooked, which was with more efficiency than skill. He told her the assault case had been fully transferred to federal jurisdiction as a component of the broader witness intimidation charges, that the state charges would still be pursued in parallel, and that her original statement remained the foundational document of the assault component of the case. "You gave me good evidence from the start," he said. "The partial plate, the physical description, the timeline. Most people in your situation, they're too shaken to hold on to that kind of detail." "I had training for high-stress documentation," she said. "Military. You learn to hold the details because the details are what you have when everything else goes sideways." "Well," a pause. "It held up. It held up through everything that came after it." She moved the pan off the heat. Rourke, the informant, The one in county holding who tried to recant. Still in protective custody, his recant was formally withdrawn once he understood the full scope of the federal case. He's in the cooperation pool. Look out for him, she said. When this is over, he made the right call eventually. A pause. I'll do what I can. She believed him. The trial date was set for 8 months out. That was the timeline of federal proceedings at this scale. There was nothing to be done about it, and Voss had explained it in a way that was honest about the difficulty of waiting without making it sound like the waiting negated anything. The evidence was built. The witnesses were secured. The case was, in Voss's word, solid. What remained was the procedural work of moving it through a system that moved at its own speed, regardless of how long anyone had waited for it to arrive. Emily went back to work. Not immediately. She took 2 weeks, which was partly directed by Voss for operational reasons, and partly because she recognized in herself, without drama, that she needed the time, not to recover from trauma in any clinical sense. More the practical reality that she had been running a parallel operation inside her own life for 7 months, and that operation was now concluded, and the nervous system had things to say about that which she needed to sit with for a little while. She read. She slept longer than usual. She took Ghost to the dog park in Millfield twice a week, neutral territory, no associations, and watched him run with the completely unself-conscious enthusiasm of a dog who had never once questioned whether any of what he was doing was worth it. She thought about that sometimes. The question of worth. 7 months of documentation and filed complaints, and nights of doubt about whether any of it would land, and what she'd landed was a federal case, wildlife trafficking charges, a county board member and cooperation agreements, a network of corruption that had been running for years through the infrastructure of a city that mostly didn't know it existed. She'd started with an animal welfare complaint, not because she'd known what was underneath it, because she'd seen something wrong and had the relevant training to document it and had decided that was enough reason. It was, she thought, still enough reason. The outcome hadn't validated the reason. The reason had been valid before she'd known the outcome. That was a thing she wanted to hold on to, because the other version of that logic, the one where you only act when you can see all the way to the end, meant nobody acted until it was too late. Joel came out at the end of the 2nd week, and they ate food he cooked, which was considerably better than anything she produced, and watched a movie she didn't entirely follow, and he didn't ask her for the full story all at once, which was the exact right instinct. He got it in pieces over meals, and he listened without giving his opinion until she asked for it, which was also right. You could have just let it go, he said once. The first complaint. You could have made the report and moved on, and nobody would have faulted you for it. I know. But you didn't. No. She thought about how to explain it. I've seen what happens when people let things go because it's easier. In the army, in this hospital, things don't resolve themselves. They just keep costing. She looked at her coffee. Somebody always pays. If you let it go, you're just deciding who. Joel didn't say anything to that. He didn't need to. On her first day back at Riverside Medical Center, she arrived 40 minutes early. She took the main lobby entrance. The elevator worked, had been working consistently for 6 weeks. Ever since the maintenance complaint she'd filed twice had been escalated by hospital administration in the wake of everything else and addressed within a single business day, which was the particular speed at which institutions moved when they understood the cost of being slow. Sandra was in the break room when Emily came in. She looked up from her chart with the expression of a woman who'd decided not to make this moment bigger than it needed to be. You're early, Sandra said. I'm always early. You are. Sandra looked back at her chart. Bay 3 had a rough night. She'll want to talk. I'll start there. She put her bag in her locker, clipped her badge, washed her hands with the specific procedural thoroughness that was the beginning of every shift, the physical reset, the signal to the body that what came next was what mattered now. Perry appeared in the doorway with his tablet and a look that was trying and failing to be casual. Hey, welcome back. Thanks, Perry. We have a new intake in Bay 7 who keeps arguing about his medication timing, so, business as usual. I'll handle it. She walked out onto the floor. The shift ran 12 hours. It always ran 12 hours. Bay 3's patient was frightened and needed more time than the chart had allocated for, and Emily gave her the time. Bay 7's patient did argue about his medication timing, and she listened to the argument fully before explaining why the timing was what it was, which was the approach she'd found worked better than cutting it short, and he grumbled but complied. A pediatric case came through at hour 6 that was complicated and required everyone's full attention for 90 minutes, and in those 90 minutes, nothing existed except the work. The specific, necessary, consequential work of keeping a child stable until the attending could make the call that needed to be made. This was the thing nobody said about nursing, or about the particular kind of work Emily had chosen and stayed in. The moments that looked like small moments from the outside. The hand held, the medication explained, the fear witnessed without flinching. Those were the actual substance of it. The drama and the federal case and the 7 months of documentation were real, and they had mattered. But they weren't what she was. What she was showed up in Bay 3 at the beginning of a shift, in the way she sat down instead of standing, in the fact that she stayed until the patient said what she needed to say. She clocked out at 1:15 a.m. and went out through the main lobby. Ghost was in the car, rear window replaced, sitting upright and watching the lobby doors. When she came through, he shifted in his seat, a contained version of the alert that meant he'd been tracking her approach through the glass. She got in. He put his head over the center console in the gesture she'd never formally trained into him and had no explanation for, but that appeared at specific moments and appeared now. "I know," she said. She drove home on a route she hadn't predetermined. Not because she was still afraid. She wasn't. Not in the operational sense. Not in the sense that had governed her movements for months. She drove a different route because she could. Because the city outside the windows was just a city again, not a terrain map of possible threats. And she could take any road she felt like taking. She thought about Paloma Reyes, who was living in a federal protection housing unit with her 4-year-old daughter, and who had, according to Voss's last update, enrolled the daughter in a preschool near the unit. Small life being rebuilt in pieces. Emily had her direct contact now. They'd spoken twice, briefly, practical things about the case process. One day they'd have a longer conversation, not about testimony or documentation, about what it cost to know something true and carry it. She thought about Darnell Whitfield, the accountant who'd spoken too fast at a public comment session and then given her records he'd been sitting on for 2 years. He'd been interviewed twice by federal investigators and had reportedly been relieved to talk to someone who could do something with what he knew. His name would appear in case documents. History would record him as a cooperating witness. He'd probably never know that Emily had included his name in her complaint as a corroborating source before he'd formally agreed to cooperate. She thought about the Inspector Greer, who'd transferred to the Western District to get away from something he couldn't report safely. Voss had reached him. He'd agreed to testify. He was coming back to Blackstone City for the first time in 18 months. She thought about the men who'd been in that alley. One of them had asked for protective custody when he understood how large the thing around him had become. One of them had a prior record in 2 other states and had understood from the first moment that his options were limited. The third had run to a bus station with $14,000 and been caught anyway. The fourth had turned himself in. All of them had understood at some point that the calculation they'd been certain about had been wrong from the beginning. She thought about Victor Hale, who had built something large and careful over a period of years and had never encountered, in all that time, something that simply would not move. She wasn't naive about what that meant. Men like Hale existed and would continue to exist, and not every woman in a hospital alley had a military-trained dog in the car. The system didn't reliably protect people. She knew that. She'd watched it fail to protect Greer and the woman whose lease hadn't been renewed and the first complaint that got reassigned. But the system also had people like Voss in it, and Rourke, and in his specific limited way, Perry, and Sandra, who had called a union rep on a Saturday night for a nurse she believed in. The system wasn't a fixed thing. It was what the people inside it decided to do with their particular piece of it. She'd decided with hers. She pulled into her building's parking structure, 2nd level near the working elevator. She sat for a moment with the engine off. 7 months ago, she'd filed a complaint because she'd seen something wrong. She hadn't known it would become federal charges and wildlife trafficking indictments and the dismantling of a corruption network that had been running through Blackstone City's infrastructure for years. She'd known none of that was coming. She'd known only that she'd seen something wrong and had the training to document it and had decided that was reason enough. That was still the whole of it, in the end. Not the outcome. The decision, made in the ordinary moment before the outcome was visible, to do the thing anyway. Ghost waited while she thought about that. He was patient in the way of a creature who understood that sometimes humans needed to sit with things. Then she got out of the car, and he followed, and they went upstairs. The apartment was hers again. No one watching it, no gray sedan on the street below. Just the ordinary geography of her own life. The kitchen drawer with the notebook she didn't need to write in anymore. The charger she'd left plugged in at the nurse's station and eventually retrieved. The window above the sink where the morning came in at a particular angle that she'd always liked and had stopped noticing during the months when she'd been looking at everything differently. She opened the window. The city outside was quiet in the way it was quiet at 2 a.m. Not empty, just settled. Someone somewhere was running. A car on the arterial 3 blocks over. The particular ambient sound of a city that didn't stop, just changed register. She stood at the window for a while. Some things she knew for certain. The case was built and would hold. The people who had tried to silence her were inside a system that was no longer theirs to manage. The women and men who'd been afraid to speak, Reyes, Greer, Whitfield, the woman whose business had been dismantled piece by piece. They'd been heard, finally, after years of evidence that they wouldn't be. Some things she knew less certainly, that courts moved slowly and outcomes were never guaranteed until they were final. That institutions protected themselves in ways that were sometimes more than they protected people. That the world had more Victor Hales in it, and she was one nurse in one city, and her documentation skills were not a systemic solution to anything. But the thing about knowing the limits of what you could do was that it clarified what you should. You couldn't do everything. You could do the thing in front of you, the thing you were equipped to do, the thing that was yours to do because you were the one who'd seen it and had the training and happened to be there. She'd been there. She turned away from the window. Ghost had already settled on the couch in the posture he adopted when he'd assessed a space and found it acceptable. She'd correct the couch habit tomorrow. Maybe. Probably not. She thought about what Sandra had said to her weeks ago in the break room corridor outside Bay 11. I've had to remind you to eat and sometimes to go home, but I've never once had to tell you something was wrong. That was the thing she wanted to hold on to. Not the commendation in her personnel file, not the federal case number, not the 30 seconds of news footage of Hale walking into a courthouse in a suit. Those things were real, and they mattered, and she didn't minimize them. But the thing that mattered most was the thing Sandra had described. The thing that had been true before any of this happened, and would be true after the trial concluded and the case became history. Knowing what was wrong when you saw it. Not talking yourself out of it. Not waiting until it was easier or safer or someone else had already started. Just seeing it. And not looking away. That was what the people who tried to break her hadn't understood. They'd thought she was fighting to prove something, to win something, to be seen as something. They'd thought she could be managed like a variable, pressured, exhausted, discredited, or frightened into a smaller version of herself. What they hadn't understood was that this was just who she was. The Army hadn't built that into her. The years on the overnight floor hadn't built that into her. It had been there before any of it, the thing her brother had recognized and sometimes found exasperating and always, in the end, been proud of. You couldn't pressure someone out of being themselves. You could try. You could make it cost. But in the end, the self was still there, and the documentation notebook was still in the drawer, and Ghost was still in the car with the window cracked. She went to bed. She slept clean the way she hadn't in months, not the defensive sleep of someone listening for what came next, but the actual sleep of a person who had finished a thing and knew it, and whose dog was at the foot of the bed, and whose window was open to a city that was, for the first time in a long time, just a city. Somewhere in it, a woman was relearning how to trust a world that had let her down. A man was coming back to a city he'd fled. A 4-year-old was starting preschool and didn't know yet what her mother had survived to make that ordinary morning possible. And a nurse who'd been lifted off the ground in a dark alley and hadn't broken, who'd been called weak and labeled a problem and had her livelihood threatened and her friend taken, that nurse was asleep. Not because the world was fixed, not because the systems had worked the way they were supposed to, Not because everything had gone smoothly or anything